There you go. I'm trying to see if... Because I was thinking about... Because there's another episode where the Hulk faces off against the army again. And I was wondering if the Colonel comes back. And I just wanted to...
Ooh.
Yeah.
He gets court-martialed and sent away at the end. Oh,
well,
so you're saying
he's taken off to trial, but come on, Mozz.
Right, that's true.
This is the military-industrial complex. Did this man do anything wrong? Blinding a few soldiers? No. This
national
is
security.
Yes, exactly. Wow, this is one of these guys who works a lot. No, he only did one episode. Okay, that's what I needed to see. Although this actor, Nicholas Coster, he actually has been in just about everything you've ever seen up until today. His most recent film is called Bum Joe.
Oh boy, I love that movie.
Yeah, I don't think it's out yet, but Nicholas Coster. No, and when you see him, you know this is. Anyway, okay, so let's get to the film. Let's get to the show. Okay, you ready? You ready, Mozz?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. McGee, don't make me angry. You wouldn't like me when I'm angry.
You are about to listen to the Totally Super Awesome 80s Reboot Overdrive podcast.
This podcast is our fan tribute to the Incredible Hulk TV show. Be advised that has been exposed to radiation and we caution to listen at your own risk. You have now entered GammaCast.
Hello and welcome once again to GammaCast. I'm your host, Charlie the Professor Esser, and with me once again is my skinny rich friend...
Mozz Manzor.
Mozz! So glad you could make it back once again for tonight's episode of The Incredible Hulk. Episode 2, Season 3, Blind Rage. First aired September 28th, 1979. We're almost to 1980, folks. This is on the 80s Reboot channel, but of course this starts in 1978 because that was the glory days of superhero television. Unlike now, when there are absolutely no superheroes on television. Our plotline is David Blair. He's David Blair this week. David Blair is staying with a young Army officer and his family who gets blinded after handling a toxic gas canister. When David investigates, he soon loses sight as well. Director was Jeffrey Hayden. Writers Kenneth Johnson, Daniel Ullman. Kenneth Johnson and Daniel Ullman. Oh, I'm guessing Ullman did the heavy lifting because Kenneth Johnson's just listed on everyone. And of course, we have a nice cast and crew, including Nicholas Coster, who is a he is one of these character actors that you just see in everything. Keeps on putting me towards the writers. But he has been in a lot of stuff. He plays our evil Colonel Drake. I could just do that. Yeah, when you have a guy whose filmography doesn't load right when you click on him, you know that he's been in everything. Okay, so let's get right to the episode. So Mozz, let's start off with, what did you think of the episode?
I thought it was, I guess, a bit more pedestrian in the sense that the story was more serving towards, hey, here's the Hulk doing cool stuff, as opposed to having more meat in the narrative itself. Which, there's room for each. And as such, we got some great moments from the Hulk on the construction side and when he's fighting the army.
Yes. See, I thought you were going to be all about this episode because this is all Hulk versus the military-industrial complex.
Well,
yeah.
I did find that interesting that even back then, I mean, the same conversations we're having now were sort of being teased at then, you know?
Oh, well, no. I mean, well, Mozz, I know you're a young man, but trust me, this stuff has been going on for a while. You know, this is actually really the start of that military, I mean, really the start of the military-industrial complex worry. Of course, goes back to the late 50s in Eisenhower when he first sounded the alarm. And led us to Donald Trump today. So thanks, Eisenhower. Yeah, you know, it's you don't want to think it, but that is it actually is that straight line from, oh, military-industrial complex, oh, there are powers against us, oh, maybe the Jews are involved, and Donald Trump. Thank you. Yeah, well, you know, the problem is that people have their fears and their worries. No, this is actually... Now, there's a couple things I like about this episode. As a fan of the current series, or of this series, and its delightful tropes, not the least of which is the have you tried killing them yet perspective that pretty much everyone has whenever you encounter a problem. That, you know, oh, someone's sniffing around our problems, our evil schemes. Have we tried just straight up murdering them? Because that might work. I think murdering is a good option.
Almost in all cases.
Yes, well, at least in 1978. You know, especially if you're just murdering a moody drifter with a clearly fake name.
Miss.
Exactly. Although I have to say this, man, for what it's worth, moody drifters in 1978, they had an easy time finding work.
Yeah, and nobody cared if you had a social security number or not. They just took your word for it.
Yeah, okay, sure. Yeah, well, everyone's paid under the table back then. See, this is the thing. This is what you don't realize. And to get conspiratorial for a minute, this is the whole thing about the digital world we live in today, is that it is literally just because, oh, yeah, we all have a digital fingerprint and we all have a digital trail. And because of that digital trail, we have the reality that no, you can't just you can't wander the earth as David Banner or Kwai-Jung Kane and walk the earth and be this man who can just show up somewhere. I mean, you can, but you don't get paid as well. So,
yeah, and it's a lot. It would be a lot harder to do. I remember when I was a young kid watching these growing up. That seemed like the ideal lifestyle. You know, just go from place to place, never belonging anywhere, never having anywhere to go back to, and just moving forward, having adventures and that, and you know, kung fu. That old show. I always used to have a dream that's how my life would probably end up. This is what I thought when I was like 12.
Well, you know, and here's what you have to understand about the people that are writing this show are 30-year-old guys who were, so basically in 1979, these were 30-year-old guys who were born in the late 40s. This is a show written by, you know, baby boomers, if not people that might have, maybe even a couple old-timers who had been around, you know. And the thing you have to remember is that after the Great Depression, there was this hobo reality, where because of the complete lack of social services, people wound up living a hobo lifestyle. And so that was a normalcy. So people back in that day would encounter drifters who by and large were not serial killers. See, nowadays, if you're a hobo and a drifter, you're probably also a serial killer, or at least in some level a criminal. there's very few hobos nowadays who are just, hey, I'm just hoboing around. It's like, no, you're a hobo because you probably killed someone in a horrific manner, and I want nothing to do with that. At this point in life, everyone said, oh, I don't know, maybe he had a drunk driving arrest and now he can't work as a doctor, but he can be our gardener. That's fine. I'm not asking him to drive my kids anywhere. He's sober when I see him, so it's good enough. And of course, that's once again this idea that, of course, David Banner, just by being, for what it's worth, a nice white guy who smiles and talks well, can walk right on an army base, start gardening for a family of apparently, a major in the army, so he's an officer, has some, and no one's like, don't worry about him. There? He just walked in, man. They said, they put an ad in the paper back when people read papers, and it said hobo wanted, or basically it said handyman wanted, or roustabout wanted, or some phraseology like that. It's like we need a person who can do manual labor at our house. We're going to pay you pennies on the dollar, but you know what? We do have a guest room. You can stay in the guest room. Not far from our children.
Right.
Because this is 1979, and this is the thing, Adam, what's his name? Adam, the boy who passed away? Not passed away, was horrifically murdered in the 1980s. Yeah, among many other children that were horrifically murdered in the 1980s, which led to our current point now, which is why my 10-year-old son has a cell phone.
Right.
Because at a certain point you say, oh, hey, you know what, 10 years old, that's the prime murdering age if you're a serial killer, and you often
they can't do much fighting back at that age.
No, well, what it was is most of these cases at that time, it was a case where, because you didn't have cell phones, because even payphones were hard to find, and parents didn't have cell phones, which is actually the counter thing, is that when parents didn't have cell phones and kids didn't have payphones that they could really use, you wound up in a situation where, kids would a person would say, hey, Bobby, because they just randomly guess, or they'd see that they had Bobby written on their shirt, and they'd say, yeah, we all remember that thing, don't have your name written on your shirt, because then the pedophiles will eat you.
Right.
Yeah, so at this point in history, it was a thing. This is before that point where before that panic happened. There were other panics that you see at this point in history, which include terrorists, as we had in the last episode, and actually an episode before that, which is just crazies. Well, that was a crazy jumping off a building, although you also had crazies who just started shooting people from clock towers. And that was your worries back then. Simpler times. Yeah, always surprised you don't get more clock tower mass shootings nowadays. But I guess
I think we just increased surveillance sort of makes that a little bit harder to achieve.
Well, exactly, and that's if nothing else, that's what you can take away from the Hulk, is that the world is really different, because now we actually watch what people do. We actually want to know what you're doing every day.
Right.
So, for everyone who's saying, Edward Snowden, you're a hero, it's like, yeah, at least you don't have an Incredible Hulk working for you. Okay.
Right.
Okay, let's get to the actual episode. So what happens is again, to give a little bit of context of 1978 or 1979, you just threw junk everywhere. We just did. It was not a thing. And, of course, the Major gets picked up by, one of the bucks. Well, I don't know if he might have been a sergeant. I don't know. But he was a guy doing roustabout duty. And he picks him up to, hey, I got his junk to dump at the big hole at the edge of the base. God knows what we're throwing in there, but hey, we're throwing it all in there. And among the things they're throwing in there is super toxic nerve gas.
Experimental super toxic Nerdcast.
Exactly. And of course they go, ooh, that's not some good smelling aerosol. And they actually make the joke, yeah, I hear that stuff's bad on the atmosphere.
Yeah, on the environment.
Yes.
As he just tosses it about.
Yes, well, because no one cared back then. It was 1970. It was the glory age, you know. It really was. It was, you know, you talk about global warming now. That was back when you didn't care. I mean, we knew about it. We were well aware of it all. We knew about aerosols and global warming, but we didn't care.
I think it's like it speaks to our bravado, and that's why I guess the superhero shows are doing so well. We felt we were invincible. Nothing could stop us, you know?
Oh, absolutely.
The world would always take care of us. The world was always bigger.
I think there's two levels. One is that, yes, we'll always survive because we're America and we're the best. I think the other aspect was that, well, you know, we're all going to be dead in a couple of years from nuclear war. You know.
Interesting.
Well, yeah, I know that as a child growing up, I was born in 1974. Mm-hmm. It was a given. And you actually see this when you watch like anything from that period talking about the future. It wasn't like, oh, well, we narrowly avoided nuclear war only by... Everyone's like, yeah, well, you know, after the first or second nuclear war, you know, you read the Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, and it was like, yeah, when after they start dropping the anthrax bombs and the nuclear bombs, you know, then we clean up and we just move on, you know. But the idea that there was going that we were pretty much done was a fairly common trope at the time. Anyway, getting back to the actual story, they get exposed to the gas. They throw everything into the pit, go off about their life, and then of course in the evening, the Major loses his sight and falls through his plate glass window. And of course goes to the hospital and they're blind and they're not sure, is he blind from falling through the window or is he what is he blind from? And then they find out that the truck driver also eventually drives his truck off a cliff because he was blinded as well. And then of course David puts together, well, you know, you guys were exposed to some strange gas that you have no idea what it was, and you guys do chemical weapons research here. Maybe that's what it was. So, of course, David goes to research this, and, of course, the evil criminal conspiracy decides to, you know, try murdering him. Buries him under a pile of rubble, and, of course, but because he's the Hulk, he hulks out. Now, there's a bit of a continuity question in this, because he's exposed to the gas, and his metabolism increases. Right. When he becomes the Hulk. But I guess there's some delay on it, so that after he comes back, he still loses his sight. But when he returns to normal, he has his sight. But he loses it later on down the road. So, exactly. I mean, it must, like, take a little bit of time for it to onset, you know? Yeah. And then... if he had hulked out later, I thought maybe it would work itself out of its system. Well, and I think well, I think that's exactly what happens because, of course, he does lose his sight. Because he's talking to the other scientist, and of course, you get this. This is a recurring a gag within the show, which is David starts sciencing up the place, and everyone says, well, hey, aren't you the gardener? Aren't you the hobo who got hired here? And he's like, yeah, but I've studied some stuff. And no, his response is belligerent almost in a sense. He goes, forgive me, Major, but aren't I the one that's blind? Yeah. Why aren't you listening to me? Yeah, well, exactly, yeah. But even before that, he's getting to the statement that he thinks it's that essentially it's a metabolic issue, that if you increase someone's metabolism, you know, I guess by giving them some cocaine, which they thought was healthy back then, right? And by 1979, no, we were pretty down on cocaine by 1979, as I recall. I know they took it out of my formula by that point. Man, I had the shakes, let me tell you. No. But yeah, it is this, but he gets this idea that you increase the metabolic rate. Of course, the Hulk has a super fast metabolism. So after he hulks out, after he goes blind, it does burn itself out. But getting to that point, because there's a nice bit of character bit that we get here. First off, we have Evil Colonel. And I was really hoping that Evil Colonel would come back and have some obsession with the Hulk, but that's not the case. When we meet the army later, it's a whole different set of colonels that are trying to trap the Hulk. But in this case, what we have is Banner figures out that it's a metabolic thing. There's this whole chemical question at play, and then what happens after Banner goes blind? The MPs escort him to a room, and he's like, "Wait, am I under arrest?" And it's like nobody's answering him, which is always a bad sign when you ask if you're under arrest and no one says you're under arrest.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then, and this is what I really liked about this episode, is that the wife totally, after she talks to her husband who has gone blind,
right,
just totally Black Widows the whole thing here. She...
Yeah, where did that come from? That was awesome.
Yeah, it was totally awesome. No, it comes out of completely left field. I think it comes out of, well, we need a way to work this out. And then, well, the wife's not doing anything, so let's use that character.
Is she still on set?
Yeah.
Is she still on set? Get her over here.
Exactly. So they have her go, and she steals a doctor's coat, and she just totally cons her way into the room. But, of course, because Banner's not under arrest, and that's the whole thing, is that Banner's not under arrest, he is a patient, even though the MPs are standing there. I don't know, we were just told, this is this recurring theme in this episode, of course, which is, we're just following orders. And they actually mentioned that, which is that, Army doctors are still in the Army, they're still just following orders. And so when she comes in and says, "I've got orders," that I think she signed her husband's name to, although I'm sure the MPs probably can't, aren't again like, "Oh, yeah, that's their signature," So she signed her husband's name, and then, and so she releases him and she walks out with him. But of course, as luck would have, we always in this episode we have a lot of people looking out windows at just the right moment. So of course, the evil colonel does see that Banner's being taken out in the wheelchair by the wife, and so he orders the lockdown. And of course, and again, quick thinking by the wife, who honestly sounds like she's got a whole storyline. She got a whole character arc that we never saw, I'm wondering if she was like, the Peggy Carter of 1970. That she was in some kind of OSS, and then, she got married, so, had to leave her job because there's still a lot of pressure on that level in the 1970s, and had a couple babies, but still missed it.
Right. I mean, and it's like if he's that high up in the military, he's probably going to want to end up with someone, that was, equally as gifted or as cool or as experienced as he was. And I see her as maybe have, worked in intelligence somewhere, at some level.
I wouldn't be surprised.
She would be like a spy or something,
Yeah, well, it's very fascinating. There were actually a lot of, it's this, one of the things that you see a lot where people are talking, the women who did the math for the moon landing, and the people who did were these women, and the women, the people who did the math on these code breaking in the 40s were these women. And yes, that is actually true. What kind of gets glossed over is that what they were doing was essentially the grunt work, which was the actual computations. on the formulas that were created. Now, many times they did create their own formulas and did create more interesting way because they were, these were genius women. But what people forget when they're saying, oh, all these women were doing this, it's like, yeah, because, this was considered at the time by those that were doing the hiring that this was grunt work. I know that, one of my mom's first job as a young woman was she used to check the math on the ENIAC computer at Standard Oil. She was a comptometer operator.
Wow.
But of course, she as she said at the time, it wasn't any big deal because it's just that we put the numbers into the comptometer, that they put the numbers into the machine, and of course it always spit out the exact same answer because it's garbage in, garbage out, So you put the numbers in right into one machine, you put the numbers in right into the other machine, both of them come up with the same answer. It's not really as impressive as it sounds. But when IBM sold the ENIAC, they would hire all these comptometer operators, these women that would essentially check the math on the machine as their sales point to the people. It's like, look, you don't believe that our machine can do all your accounting for your company. We're going to give you, 10 women that are going to sit here in the old-fashioned way and do it as well, and you're going to see that the math checks out. And of course, the math always checked out. So yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if the major's wife was in fact a code cracker and a woman of mystery in her own right prior to domesticity. But she rightly and intelligently tells Banner, "You've got to get out of here." And so when she does get pulled over, Banner's not in the car. And they do take her prisoner, but of course, the colonel says, well, can we give her that sodium pentothal stuff I've been hearing about? And the doctor's like, you know what, you really are an idiot, and I want nothing more to do with you. I'll be the doctor when we're studying crazy chemicals, but you want to start injecting people with crazy drugs to try and make them talk? Yeah, that ain't my bailiwick. Which is why he's not the one being let off in handcuffs at the end of the episode.
Right. He's sort of one that did have a conscience.
Yes, and of course, so she tells Banner to go to the fence, but of course Banner's blind, so getting to the fence is a little more difficult. But of course, he does wander on to the testing range, which I thought was a nice little callback to the original Hulk comic book, because of course, the whole reason he becomes the Hulk is because Rick Jones, takes a bet to go onto the testing range and doesn't know that there's supposed to be an atomic test that day. And we do get to see, because of this, because of the bombs exploding and David Banner hulking out, we do get a Hulk versus tank scene, which I think is a highlight of any Hulk of any hulking, is to have a Hulk versus a tank. That's pure from the comic books. And I wasn't quite sure.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I wasn't quite sure if that was the same. If it was the same two guys from the basic training scene who encountered the Hulk again.
That would be funny. That was a great scene. I thought that was my favorite scene of the whole episode, was when they're doing their little drills and running over that wall. And for a moment, Hulk just says, hey, that looks like kind of fun. Mm-hmm. And he forgets everything else, and he just wants to be part of the team and wants to climb the thing.
Yes.
And they see him and they run, and then he gets to the wall, and I don't know if he's just too dumb to figure out what else to do with this. He just breaks through it.
Yes.
I thought for me that was my favorite moment of the episode.
Yeah, well, you have to remember that in the context of 1979, this is just after the Superman film came out, which had this real conflict between a weighty conversational film about superheroism and, cartoon slapsticky. And right. I think we are seeing that bleed down into our Hulk right now, where we're seeing a little bit more slapstick with the Hulk. I mean, in the Confession episode, we have this whole scene in the bowling alley that's very slapsticky with the Hulk. And I think at times, and I definitely think in the basic training scene, we get a little slapsticky there as well. I don't think it necessarily takes away from the episode, but it is something to be mindful of as we're going forward, is how much are they playing the Hulk for laughs, and how much it's being played for a serious dramatic scene.
Right, but I mean, I don't know. I didn't think it took away from, the truth of the Hulk. I thought it was sort of an interesting insight into the fact that, he's still sort of a sentient being that's prone to finding things fun. I think giving us that side of it is kind of cool. It sort of humanizes him a little bit.
Well, that is true too. And honestly, I've often said that I felt that Lou Ferrigno was a really fantastic silent actor. And I don't say that as a negative. I mean, there are a lot of people from the silent era who were fantastic silent actors who couldn't make the transition to speaking roles for whatever reason, because it's a completely different skill set to be a silent actor. To really act with your eyes and act with your emotions and act in a way to embody a character in that way. It's a different thing, but I've always thought that Lou Ferrigno actually did it very well.
I think so too.
Yeah, and as we've often said on this show, the Hulk, the Hulk in the 1970s show and the 1980s show, we think of the Hulk as this creature of rage. Rage is the trigger for the Hulk, but once the Hulk is out, he's the Hulk. He's his own creature. And he isn't driven by rage. He isn't driven by anger. He is certainly quick to anger when he's in danger or when other people are in danger. But once the danger subsides, he has a few moments where he can actually just be the Hulk and just be a chill Hulk and have fun or explore the world. A few episodes ago we had the Hulk essentially helping a guy out who was stuck in the mud just because, you're stuck in the mud here, let me lift up your truck, and there you go. Now you're not stuck in the mud anymore. Because
it seems like a simple decision.
Yeah, well, exactly. It's like if you had superhuman strength and you saw someone stuck in the mud, you'd stop, you'd lift them up, and you'd move them on, and, because why not? Yeah. You're not a horrible person. So, of course, what happens after the Hulk defeats the tank, he sort of wanders off. And you're not really given a lot of, they kind of tied this episode up with a bow because essentially right after the Hulk gets taken away or after the Hulk basically runs off. And again, we see the Hulk fully dressed in stylish clothes. I certainly believe that David Banner... This is my statement. I think David Banner had a lot of money stowed away that he does keep in like a reserve account somewhere. You see him struggling for cash, but that's because this is a cash economy. Right. So so he's always kind of like hand to mouth. But once he can get himself situated, by the end of the episode, he's always got his nice jacket on. He's ready to do his hitchhiking. He's already set. But we get the nice voiceover.
I always thought he must have like a huge wardrobe budget.
Yeah,
because everywhere he goes, he's destroying everything he wears.
Well, they've touched on that a couple times. One time they actually had him in Terror in Times Square, which is in the first season. They show him leaving money behind when he steals clothes off of a clothesline. Because clotheslines were still a thing. This is just to take you back to 1978, 1979. Clotheslines were still a thing. People still put their clothes on a clothesline to dry, and so he would take the clothes and he'd put them on and he'd be all set to go. Later we see, actually I think it was last episode. He takes the clothes off he doesn't leave any money. He's like, heck with those hillbillies. I'm stealing their clothes. But yeah, David Banner definitely is. I do believe that David Banner has some money hidden away somewhere in some Swiss account that he can access, but it's not easy for him to access. So he can get to it. He can get some cash infusion, but he can't He doesn't just have walking around money. He doesn't have a debit card that anywhere he goes he's okay. And of course, if the world believes he's dead, he can't use this stuff. He can only use the money that were in his offshore accounts that are controlled by a code number. Anyway, so he wanders off. The doctor. We get a nice voiceover. We see that the Major has gotten his sight back, although he's got sunglasses on because his eyes aren't perfect yet because he's not a Hulk after all. And the doctor says, yeah, his hunch on the metabolic rate was right, and we were able to fix you. And the colonel's being taken off for his court-martial. And the doctor says, yeah, and I'm going to, hopefully they'll be nice to me at my court-martial. Hopefully they're going to just let me resign, which is nice. And of course, this is your basic idea that, at the end of the day, justice needs to be done. This is still a point in history where we don't want at the end of the episode for the villains to, which is probably why we don't get that Colonel back later. As I had said earlier, there is another run-in with the Hulk later when the military seems to be very aware of the Hulk, and they've found a way to try and catch him. Which kind of always, years later when the I think the last, not the last, but the last of the original series of Friday the 13th comes out, they have the military trying to catch Jason. And it kind of struck me in that way of, how they sort of set the trap for the Hulk and they brought the Hulk out and then they catch him in some method or another. And I thought maybe the Colonel would come back for that. He does not. It's a different Colonel in that episode, and we'll have to see that when it comes up. But no, so the Colonel gets arrested. The Colonel gets put on trial for and not for nothing. Nothing he was doing was a problem up until he starts trying to cover up the fact that, this guy got blinded by our chemical weapons and this other guy died because of it. Had he just said, yeah, it seems like, someone wasn't, because he could have completely let it all roll downhill and say, someone didn't properly dispose of that canister and that's why those people, and that person should be court-martialed. That corporal should be drummed out of the army for their insubordination. He could have completely absolved himself, but he didn't want any bad press at all, and so he winds up getting court-martialed,
Right.
Yeah.
He only had 6 weeks left until he got his general star, and he was not letting anything get in the way of that.
Yeah, well, it's avarice and hubris, man.
Right.
That's why they rhyme, because it's like you have that hubris, I am deserving, and you have that avarice, I want it, and when they combine, then it just, that's when the gods send the lightning bolts down from Olympus and say, you know what, no, Perseus, you don't get a throne up here. Hercules does, not you, Perseus. Have a nice day.
Or it's like the banana peel on Mario Kart.
Exactly. To bring it all home for the younger audience. Okay. I think we've covered this episode pretty well. Mozz, what do you think?
Oh, absolutely.
Mozz, if people would like to get in touch with you, talk to you, how can they do that?
Find me on Facebook, Mozz Manzoor, MozzManzoor.
Okay, very good. And of course, you can always listen to me on the Southgate Media Network, on GammaCast, on the Nuff Said feed for All New Marvel Roundup and Super Connectivity, and coming soon on the Legends of DC podcast for the Podcast of Tomorrow, I believe we're calling it officially, where we talk about Legends of Tomorrow. And, of course, here on the GammaCast and coming soon on the Nuff Said feed with Mozz Manzoor, at least for the first episode. We're going to have to find out how it goes after that. The Cage Cast, where we're going to be discussing the new Luke Cage Netflix series. And, of course, if you'd like to write to me in that old-fashioned email ways, the way our Mozz and Paz once did, do so at superconnectivityblog@gmail.com. That's superconnectivityblog, all one word, @gmail.com. And, of course, if you want to follow me on Twitter, do so when I live tweet The Incredible Hulk and other shows at Charlie Esser. That's CharlieEsser. Look for the 2 E's in the middle for quality. Okay, Mozz, this has been a great show. Thank you for hanging out with me again. And
Thank you for having me.
Yes, and you all out there in podcast land, Hulk out with us again next week. Good night.
We hope you've enjoyed this show. This podcast is part of the 80s Reboot Overdrive channel on Southgate Media Group. You can follow us on Facebook on the 80s Reboot group page. We're also on Twitter and Tumblr at 80s Reboot. We invite you to check out all the wonderful podcasts and blogs available at southgatemediagroup.com. And thank you for reliving the 80s.